Ragnar Lothbrok stands as one of the most iconic names associated with the Viking Age, yet his historical identity remains complex. The earliest centuries of the Viking era produced few written records within Scandinavia itself, forcing historians to reconstruct events through a combination of archaeology, foreign chronicles, and later sagas. This has made figures like Ragnar difficult to define with certainty, but highly valuable for understanding how Viking leaders and their reputations evolved over time. To situate Ragnar's story, we must first understand the world of the early 9th century. Scandinavia was not yet composed of unified kingdoms. Instead, it consisted of regional chieftains, powerful families ruling clusters of farms, trading hubs, and coastal settlements. Leadership depended on personal reputation, military strength, and the ability to distribute wealth. Raiding became an essential feature of political power, both as a means of obtaining treasure and as a way to reward warriors who pledged loyalty to ambitious leaders. Technological advancements played a major role in shaping this era. Viking longships, clinker-built vessels with shallow drafts, flexible hulls, and both sail and oars, enabled Scandinavian warriors to travel with unprecedented speed and range. These ships allowed them to cross the North Sea, navigate rivers deep inland, and strike coastal settlements long before local rulers could organize defenses. The combination of political fragmentation in Europe and exceptional naval mobility created the perfect environment for Scandinavian expansion. It is within this context that the legend of Ragnar Lothbrok begins. Later sagas portray him as a Danish or Swedish warlord of high status, sometimes described as the son of a ruler named Sigurd Hing. While this genealogy cannot be confirmed, it reflects the cultural memory of a leader with significant influence over multiple regions. Saga narratives emphasize Ragnar's daring raids, strategic intelligence, and relentless pursuit of fame, traits admired among Viking elites. Although the sagas were written centuries after the fact, they preserve echoes of real historical transitions. By the early 800s, Scandinavian raids on the British Isles and Francia had become increasingly organized. Monasteries such as Lindisfarne, Iona, and Jarrow had already been attacked, and coastal defenses across England and the Frankish Empire proved inadequate. Viking leaders recognized the wealth and vulnerability of these regions, and raiding transformed from opportunistic strikes into deliberate, large-scale expeditions. This was the environment that shaped the narrative of Ragnar Lothbrok, a figure who, whether real or composite, became the literary embodiment of early Viking ambition. His name would soon be linked to some of the most dramatic raids of the 9th century, marking the beginning of his rise as the symbolic ruler of the Viking world.
Ragnar Lothbrok's association with the earliest major Viking raids on England and Francia comes primarily from texts composed in the centuries after these events. Yet these stories align closely with the real patterns of Scandinavian expansion. As Viking activity intensified during the early 9th century, England's political landscape offered fertile opportunities for raiders. The island was divided into competing Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, Northumbria, Mercia, Wessex, and East Anglia, each vulnerable to attacks depending on their shifting alliances and internal conflicts. Later saga tradition places Ragnar at the head of a fleet that attacked Northumbria, one of the most unstable kingdoms of the period. While the sagas dramatize this raid, framing it as a personal challenge to prove Ragnar's bravery, the broader concept reflects historical reality. Northumbria suffered repeated Viking incursions from the mid-9th century onward. Its coastline, monasteries, and river systems made it particularly exposed to Scandinavian fleets. The famous story of Ragnar's capture by King Ella, culminating in his execution in a pit of snakes, appears in Ragnar's saga Lothbrok and Saxo Grammaticus's Gesta Danorum. Whether or not this dramatic death occurred, the tale reflects the intense hostilities between Northumbrians and Viking forces. The snake pit episode likely symbolizes humiliation and martyrdom in Norse cultural memory, serving as a narrative spark for later events attributed to his sons. Ragnar is also linked to one of the most significant Viking attacks on the Frankish world, the Siege of Paris in 845. This event is well documented in the Annals of Saint Bertrand, which describe a Viking leader, not named Ragnar in the contemporary record, who sailed up the Seine with a large fleet. The Frankish king, Charles the Bald, eventually paid this leader a substantial tribute to prevent the destruction of Paris. Later medieval writers connected this unnamed chieftain with Ragnar Lothbrok, merging historical events with saga tradition to elevate Ragnar's reputation. These associations, though uncertain in their literal truth, reveal how later generations understood the scale of early Viking operations. Leaders like the one who attacked Paris or those who raided northern England were memorable figures. Oral tradition preserved their exploits, and over time, these memories coalesced around a single legendary name, Ragnar. This consolidation was not uncommon in medieval storytelling, where genealogies, victories, and dramatic incidents were often attributed to an exemplary hero. The blend of history and legend can be seen in Ragnar's supposed marriages as well. The sagas describe two wives, Thora Borgarhjort and Lagertha the Shield Maiden, though the latter appears only in Saxo's highly mythologized narrative. These relationships are symbolic rather than historical, reflecting hero tales rather than political alliances. They also serve to connect Ragnar with a broader network of semi-legendary figures, reinforcing his place within the Norse mytho-historical tradition. What remains clear is that the stories attached to Ragnar mirror the major developments of early Viking expansion: the movement of Scandinavian forces into England, the rise of massive coordinated raids, and the growing impact of Norse power on European political structures. As these events unfolded, Ragnar's legend matured, setting the stage for the dramatic arrival of the army said to avenge him.
The event most closely associated with Ragnar Lothbrok's legacy and historical sources is the arrival of the Great Heathen Army in England in 865 CE. Unlike earlier Viking raids, which were seasonal and opportunistic, this force represented a coordinated, long-term military campaign. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes it as a great army of heathens landing first in East Anglia before moving systematically through the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Although the Chronicle does not name Ragnar, later writers, both Norse and English, connected the leaders of this army to him, portraying the invasion as an act of vengeance for Ragnar's death at the hands of King Alla of Northumbria. The army's leadership is better documented than Ragnar himself. Among its commanders were Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan, and Ubba, figures who appear prominently in Norse tradition as Ragnar's sons. Ivar, in particular, is well attested in Irish and English sources, where he is described as a powerful Viking ruler active in both Britain and Ireland. While it remains uncertain whether these leaders were literally Ragnar's sons, the tradition that they sought to avenge him became a central part of the saga narrative and framed the army's actions in a dramatic, familial context. The Great Heathen Army first demanded horses from the East Anglian king, enabling them to move quickly through the countryside. In 866, they marched north and captured the crucial city of York, then the political heart of Northumbria.
The chronicle records that rival Northumbrian kings Alla and Osbert temporarily joined forces to retake the city, but were defeated in a decisive battle in 867. Both kings were killed, and later saga tradition retroactively identified Alla as Ragnar's killer, tying his death directly to this battle and reinforcing the idea of familial vengeance. The army's leadership is better documented than Ragnar himself. Among its commanders were Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan, and Ubba, figures who appear prominently in Norse tradition as Ragnar's sons. Ivar, in particular, is well attested in Irish and English sources, where he is described as a powerful Viking ruler active in both Britain and Ireland. While it remains uncertain whether these leaders were literally Ragnar's sons, the tradition that they sought to avenge him became a central part of the saga narrative and framed the army's actions in a dramatic, familial context. The Great Heathen Army first demanded horses from the East Anglian king, enabling them to move quickly through the countryside. In 866, they marched north and captured the crucial city of York, then the political heart of Northumbria. The chronicle records that rival Northumbrian kings Alla and Osbert temporarily joined forces to retake the city, but were defeated in a decisive battle in 867. Both kings were killed, and later saga tradition retroactively identified Alla as Ragnar's killer, tying his death directly to this battle and reinforcing the idea of familial vengeance. The conquest of Northumbria followed directly on the heels of the previous campaign. The army's leadership is better documented than Ragnar himself. Among its commanders were Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan, and Ubba, figures who appear prominently in Norse tradition as Ragnar's sons. Ivar, in particular, is well attested in Irish and English sources, where he is described as a powerful Viking ruler active in both Britain and Ireland. While it remains uncertain whether these leaders were literally Ragnar's sons, the tradition that they sought to avenge him became a central part of the saga narrative and framed the army's actions in a dramatic, familial context. The Great Heathen Army first demanded horses from the East Anglian king, enabling them to move quickly through the countryside. In 866, they marched north and captured the crucial city of York, then the political heart of Northumbria. The chronicle records that rival Northumbrian kings Alla and Osbert temporarily joined forces to retake the city, but were defeated in a decisive battle in 867. Both kings were killed, and later saga tradition retroactively identified Alla as Ragnar's killer, tying his death directly to this battle and reinforcing the idea of familial vengeance. The conquest of Northumbria followed directly on the heels of the previous campaign.
As the Great Heathen Army carved its path through England, the legend of Ragnar Lothbrok grew alongside the documented achievements of its leaders. Medieval writers sought explanations for the sudden rise of powerful Viking commanders like Ivar the Boneless and Halfdan, and the figure of Ragnar became the narrative anchor that united their disparate exploits. In this sense, Ragnar's legacy was less about a single historical individual and more about the cultural mechanism through which medieval societies preserved memory, interpreted conflict, and constructed lineage. The Icelandic sagas, composed in the 12th and 13th centuries, played a crucial role in shaping the Ragnar known today. Works such as Ragnar Saga Lothbrokar and The Tale of Ragnar's Sons organized oral traditions into coherent family histories, blending historical events with heroic motifs. These sagas portray Ragnar as a quintessential Viking ruler, ambitious, battle-hardened, and driven by a desire to earn everlasting fame. His marriages to women such as Thora and the shield maiden Lagertha reflect literary themes rather than historical record, demonstrating how saga authors used symbolic relationships to frame heroic narratives. Saxo Grammaticus's Gesta Danorum written in Latin for a Danish audience, further elevated Ragnar by incorporating him into the royal genealogies of medieval Denmark. In Saxo's telling, Ragnar becomes an ancestor of powerful Danish kings, transforming him into a cornerstone of national identity. This genealogical linking served two purposes. It legitimized contemporary rulers by associating them with a legendary past, and it retroactively organized the chaotic early Viking era into a structured historical continuum. Outside Scandinavia, Ragnar's legend took on different meanings. In England, where the memory of Viking raids was tied to trauma and destruction, writers portrayed Ragnar as a fearsome pagan invader. The story of his execution in a snake pit, first appearing in medieval Norse sources, was embraced by English chroniclers because it offered a moral resolution, a violent pagan king meeting a gruesome, fitting end. For Christian writers, Ragnar symbolized the threat posed by the Northmen and the ultimate triumph of divine justice. Meanwhile, Frankish accounts focused less on Ragnar himself and more on the consequences of Viking attacks. The siege of Paris in 845, led by a chieftain who later tradition equated with Ragnar, is recorded in detail by the Annals of Saint Bertin. Although not named, this leader's actions, sailing up the Seine, defeating Frankish forces, and extracting tribute from King Charles the Bald, fit the profile of the kind of warlord Ragnar was imagined to be. When later medieval writers identified this unnamed chief as Ragnar, they created a connection between his legend and one of the most dramatic events of early Viking history. Archaeology offers critical context for understanding why Ragnar's story grew. Excavations in Scandinavia and the Danelaw reveal a world of mobile, militarized elites whose lives were defined by raiding, trading, and political maneuvering. Ship burials, weapon hoards, and fortifications reflect the activities of leaders whose names have not survived in written record, but whose deeds likely inspired saga material. Ragnar serves as a symbolic representation of these real historical dynamics. By the High Middle Ages, Ragnar Lothbrok had become more than a character in a single saga. He had become a cultural emblem. His story provided a framework through which Norse society narrated its past, interpreted its values, and preserved the memory of the Viking Age long after that era had ended.
By the end of the medieval period and into the early modern era, Ragnar Lothbrok had become one of the most enduring symbols of the Viking Age, an archetype shaped by centuries of storytelling, political agendas, and cultural reinterpretation. His legend continued to evolve even as the world that created him transformed. The Christianization of Scandinavia, the consolidation of kingdoms, and the rise of centralized monarchies all influenced how Norse history was remembered. Ragnar became a bridge between the pagan past and the emerging identities of medieval Denmark, Norway, and Iceland. During the Renaissance and Enlightenment, scholars revisited the sagas with renewed interest. They sought to distinguish historical fact from literary embellishment, questioning whether Ragnar was a single individual or a composite of several 9th century Viking leaders. Figures such as Regan Harry, who led the documented siege of Paris in 845, or the Norse Gaelic king Eimar in Ireland, became candidates for the real Ragnar. Although no consensus emerged, these investigations highlighted how saga tradition blended fragments of genuine history into cohesive, heroic narratives. Ragnar's story thus became a case study in the intersection between oral memory and historical record. Archaeology deepened this understanding. Excavations across Scandinavia and the British Isles reveal the material reality of the Viking Age. Fortified towns like Birka and Hedeby,
richly furnished graves of warrior elites, and the remains of longships built for distant voyages. These discoveries showed that the kind of world described in the sagas, one of ambitious chieftains, maritime warfare, and extensive trade networks, was not fictional. Even if Ragnar himself remains elusive, the societal structures that produced someone like him were undeniably real. In England, the legacy of Ragnar lived on through the political impact of the Danelaw, the region shaped by Scandinavian settlement following the campaigns of the Great Heathen Army. Place names, linguistic influences, and legal traditions reflected centuries of Norse presence. The memory of Ragnar's supposed sons, Ivar, Halfdan, and Ubba, persisted in local histories, blending into the cultural identity of northern and eastern England. Ragnar's legend, therefore, indirectly contributed to the understanding of how deeply Viking culture had penetrated the British Isles. In the modern era, Ragnar's story gained renewed global attention through literature, academic works, and especially popular media. Television dramas, historical fiction, and documentaries presented Ragnar to new audiences, often drawing loosely from saga narratives while incorporating dramatic interpretation. These portrayals, although stylized, sparked widespread interest in Viking history and encouraged deeper public engagement with archaeological and historical research. Ragnar became not only a character from medieval tradition, but an international cultural figure. Today, Ragnar Lothbrok occupies a unique place in historical consciousness. To scholars, he represents the complexity of early medieval historiography, a legendary figure formed from fragments of reality woven together by centuries of retelling. To the public, he embodies the courage, ambition, and mobility that defined the Viking Age. His legend persists because it expresses the values and aspirations of the societies that carried it forward. The pursuit of fame, the acceptance of fate, and the power of memory to transcend time. In the end, Ragnar Lothbrok's importance does not depend on whether he lived exactly as the sagas describe. His enduring presence in history reflects the cultural impact of the Viking Age itself and the human desire to preserve the memory of extraordinary figures who symbolize an era.